How would you describe the difference between the relationships the two countries have with China? We've spent a lot of time talking about Australia and New Zealand's respective relationships with the United States, but a question about China, and I'll put that to all of you. So who wants to take the first shot at that?
Well, I'd say they're both important. No, you go, Stephen. You're the main man in this.
Well, as I said earlier, I think we have slightly different perspectives on China. I mean, in fact, this is a rapidly emerging sort of environment, and certainly under the a previous Australian government, the difference was becoming quite acute. But yeah, the current government in Australia that's now carrying on, I think we're seeing the relations, the views come a bit closer together. But China is an indispensable partner for New Zealand, our largest trading partner. I mean, all the rest of it. We don't perceive the threat in quite the same way that maybe our friends in Australia do. But of course, there are those differences of values that we have to continue to work on. Bear in mind, of course, China is a very important economic partner for Australia as well. And even during this time of, so-called Chinese coercion against Australia, which was very serious in some sectors, of course, the trade relationship continued to grow. So both of us are trying to find ways of, walking and chewing gum at the same time. And that gives us a lot to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, China's transformation has been driving our own economic transformation in much the same way. They're our top export destination by far as well. I guess one way you could look at the differences in how our two countries have approached that is it's maybe a question of time. I feel like maybe some of the tensions hit us first during our, for example, under the Turnbull government in Australia. That's when we started to become a little concerned about some of the evidence emerging of, coercion and, undeclared influence operations by China's Communist Party in our country. And that led to some reforms around, foreign interference laws, which were a world first that the Turnbull government pushed through. And then that played out into other instances as well, responding to threats that we were seeing around our telecommunications networks. I think fundamentally it comes down to, this is just speaking for myself, but ever since Xi Jinping has come into power, 2012, I think we've seen China change a little in ways that have made us rethink how we approach that relationship. Massive opportunity, indispensable partner, of course, but it comes with risks. And I think we're just trying to navigate those risks very carefully. We see the United States as part of an indispensable part of the region in just the same way. The region has benefited and flourished and prospered off the backing of decades of US active presence in this region. That's ushered in 3/4 of a century of the Asian peace, is what international relations theorists would call it. It's a remarkable achievement. We've got to hold on to that. But yeah, it's an example of something where we're approaching differently. But I do think we're converging increasingly. It's partly because of electoral changes on our side. When the Albanese government first came into power, did a really good job, not of conceding any of our interests or values, but on stabilizing the relationship, just hitting pause on what was a downward spiral and just rebuilding dialogue and communication with Beijing so that we could work through what are legitimate differences and concerns that we have. But then, we've seen electoral changes on the Kiwi side as well, who are coming in with a different philosophy and, starting to rethink New Zealand's own strategic outlook and whether there's a way to, for example, I understand there's still a debate about whether it's in New Zealand's interest to join the non-nuclear parts of AUKUS. So yeah, I think we're seeing convergence on both sides.
Yeah, I think that we need to understand that what I've learned in Australia, that they perceive a risk in our area, but from China far more than we do from New Zealand. And some of that's geography, of course, and also, interestingly, Albanese's first international visit was to Indonesia. And so building up relationships alongside the very important trading partner of China. But I just get the feeling that we don't always understand how Australia perceives the threat. They've certainly saw the threat in the Solomons and also in PNG. You know, we've seen a little bit with some of the action in the Cook Islands. So I think we don't always understand that they have had for much longer than us concern about closer neighbours. And we are, I suppose, protected in many ways by the fact that Australia's ahead of us in geography. So I think that it's very important. Trade is very important for Australia. It's number one, as Jeremy said. And you did see the impact of the coercion that came from China when they, under the previous government, you know, in wine and beef and grain and so on. Although they might not be the biggest things that are exported, you could see how the tap could be turned on and off. And that isn't something that we've experienced to the same extent as Australia.
Yeah, maybe, and just to answer your reflection on, you know, how we see, to use your word, the threat differently. You know, geography may be part of that, but I think just zooming out a little bit more, there are some upstream drivers. I just think, you know, I've mentioned previously how both of our countries, Australia and New Zealand, really depend on laws and rules and institutions, right, to help our world economy function in a way that's predictable and fair and just. And when you see, you know, a major world power dismissing, for example, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, I mean, it's very clear what the maritime boundaries of the Philippines are, but sending Chinese Coast Guard vessels in there and fire hosing Marines, I mean, that's, you know, that's pretty unimpressive behavior. And while it might not be our people getting fire hosed on those boats, it's the rules are getting fire hosed that we all depend on. And when you see, you know, sister democracies like Taiwan getting openly intimidated by vast armadas, I mean, this is, you know, yes, we're far away in a distant corner, but the principles that are under pressure, I think, impact us all. And I totally get that we might respond in slightly different ways. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
I certainly agree with you, Jeremy, that the principles are incredibly important, and the international order that we've come to rely on, particularly as smaller economies in our case anyway, is paramount. But I just suggest to you that the abuse of the international order is not just a Chinese problem these days. And I feel very much for Australian policymakers right now, because, you know, look at what is happening in the United States and look at the Trump tariffs. Australia is an FTA partner with the United States for 20 years or more. It applies no tariffs to American exports to the United States. It has a trade deficit with the United States. It's a close ally. And look what's happened. They still get 10% like we do. And, you know, when it comes to bullying neighbors and all the rest of it, the whole thing's being redefined. But, you know, the way we choose to react is something we need to determine in our own way. And I guess what is important is that when it comes to Australia and New Zealand, that is something that we want to talk about and coordinate on as much as we can. And we need to appreciate the differences that we each bring, the difference in perspective that we bring to those considerations.
Good point.